Imagine that one day you have a college that is there to not just advocate for your profession that you're a part of, but they're advocating for the children and the families that you yourself are advocating for every day, trying to make their lives better, trying to make their lives easier, trying to help them navigate multiple systems of government, trying to help them understand the child welfare system, helping them trying to understand the justice system, helping families get connected to mental health services, helping families get connected with places like the family resource centers, which are now also getting their funding cut. Helping people get connected with organizations like Ephraim Transition House. Helping families get connected with family services, the organization, not the act, Madam Speaker. They play a huge role in trying to develop comprehensive approaches so that they can protect their most vulnerable, but they can also try and do all the work they possibly can do to keep families together. And while they're doing that hard work, their college is doing the hard work and hard advocacy of providing the various approaches, Madam Speaker, providing the various approaches that can work toward strengthening families, can work towards keeping families together and putting in the wraparound supports for all families earlier than when they occur. Because also within the system, within the child welfare system, Madam Speaker, is children are not usually apprehended the first time, or the second, or the third, or the fourth. Sometimes a lot of calls are made before children are apprehended. Not because people don't care what's going on, they do. There's just sometimes no space for the kids. They don't have foster parents. So, Madam Speaker, when that is the system that they are working in, their college is saying, we need wraparound supports immediately. When families first show signs of needing help, before we apprehend the kids, let's put all the systems in place for everybody. Everybody gets equal ground when those calls are made that need the help. Sometimes a parent has children with a disability, and they just need more help. That's all they need. They don't need their child apprehended. They need more supports to take the social workers out of the college that advocates every day, not only on their behalf, but on the families and the children that they are working with, I think might do a great disservice to Nova Scotians. So, Madam Speaker, I look forward to hearing from Nova Scotians across this province at public bills. I hope to hear from as many, and I hope to get the emails in my inbox. With that, I take my seat. Thank you.
Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor of the motion? Okay. There has been a request for recorded votes. The bells will ring until the whips are satisfied. Order. Order. The clerk will now conduct a recorded vote. Please remain completely silent while the clerks record your vote. I recognize the clerk.
Brian Comer. Nolan Young.
Yes.
Kim Maslin. John Lohr.
Yes.
Brendan McGuire. Tim Houston. Barbara Adams. Michelle Thompson.
Yes.
Fred Tilley. Dave Ritzy. Twyla Gross.
Yes.
Tom Taggart. Brad Johns.
Yes.
Marco McLeod.
Yes.
Adegoke Fadare.
Yes.
Susan Corkum Greek. Leah Martin. Chris Palmer. Melissa Sheehy Richard.
Yes.
John A. McDonald.
Yes.
Brian Wong. Trevor Boudreau. Brad McGowan.
Yes.
Kyle McQuarrie.
Yes.
Tim Outfit.
Yes.
Rick Burns.
Yes.
Julie Van Exen. Diane Timmons. David Bowlby.
Yes.
Nick Hilton. John White. Tim Hallman.
Yes.
Scott Armstrong.
Yes.
Jill Balzer.
Yes.
Colton LeBlanc. Claudia Chender.
Yes.
Lisa Lachance.
Yes.
Susan LeBlanc.
Yes.
Ian Rankin. Derek Mombercat. Elizabeth Smith McCrossan.
Yes.
Paul Wozni. Susie Hansen.
Yes.
Kendra Coombs.
Yes.
Kent Smith.
Yes.
Greg Moreau. Tori Rushton. Brian Robichaud. Becky Druin.
Yes.
Damian Stoylov.
Yes.
Danny McGilvery. Krista Gallagher. Rod Wilson. Lena Hamid.
Yes.
I recognize the clerk.
The results of the recorded vote are as follows. Yeas 27, nays 0.
The motion is carried. I recognize the Honorable Deputy Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call order of business, private and local bills?
Order of business, private and local bills.
Speaker,
I
would,
recognize the Honorable Deputy Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call private and local bills for second reading?
Private and local bills for second reading. I recognize the Honorable Deputy House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call bill number 204?
Bill number 204. I recognize the Honorable Member for Kings North.
Madam Speaker, I move that Bill number 204, an act to amend Chapter 76 of the Acts of 1983, an act relating to taxation by the Town of Kentville of the industrial commercial properties in Annapolis Valley Regional Industrial Park, be now read a second time. Madam Speaker, this bill is at the request of the Mayor and Council of the Town of Kentville and is an amendment to a 1983 Act which created the Kentville, the Annapolis Valley Regional Industrial Park and relates to certain definitions related to taxation. I look forward to hearing the comments of my colleagues.
I recognize the Honorable Member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We think this bill is great. I've been looking for more food processing in this province since 2021. And so if this will encourage more food processing in the heart of the Annapolis Valley, then we think this is great.
I recognize the Honorable Member for Sydney, Member 2.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Happy to support.
If I am to recognize the honourable member for Kings North, it will be to close debate on Bill number 204. I recognize the honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you to my colleagues. On the other side, I move that Bill 204 now pass.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 204, an act relating to taxation by the town of Kemptville of industrial and commercial properties in the Annapolis Valley Regional Industrial Park. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The bill will be referred to. The motion is carried. The bill will be. Oh, yeah. I recognize the clerk.
Bill 204, an act to amend Chapter 76 of the Acts of 1983, an act relating to taxation by the town of Kentville of industrial and commercial properties in the Annapolis Valley Regional Industrial Park.
Ordered that the bill be referred to, slowing down a bit, referred to private and local public bills. Oh. Oh, I thought someone stopped. Order that the bill be referred to private and local bills. Ordered that Bill 201 be referred to the Standing Committee on Public Bills. I recognize the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call the order of business, public bills and orders?
Order of business, public bills and orders.
Speaker, would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Speaker, would you please call bill number 205?
205, Elections Act and House of Assembly Act, an act to amend. I recognize the Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Justice.
I rise in my place today, Speaker, to move the Bill 205, Amendments to the Elections Act and House of Assembly Act, now be read a second time. Bill 205 removes outdated election requirements and helps make the electoral process more streamlined and less costly. It is important for legislation to keep pace with the times, and these amendments do just that. Bill 205 will remove the requirement for candidates to pay a $200 nomination deposit. It allows candidates to pay for publicity costs directly with their personal credit card. It removes the requirement for returning officers to reside in the electoral district in which they were appointed. It clarifies the rules regarding the transfer of services, money, or property with respect to situations when a candidate later runs as an independent or for a different registered party. It increases the threshold for when a candidate expenses need to be audited to $1,000 from a current cost of $500. Now, these amendments mainly come from the recommendations by the Chief Electoral Officer after the 2021 and 2024 general elections. Many of these were supported by the Election Commission. These amendments respond directly to expert advice and ensure the legislative framework keeps pace with modern electoral practices. But just as importantly, they will make the electoral process easier to navigate for everyone involved. With that, I'll take my place and hear what my colleagues have to say, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm happy to rise and just offer a few comments on this. You know, we have a voter engagement problem in Nova Scotia. We just had the last election where we had the lowest voter turnout ever. Less than 50% of Nova Scotians voted. And, we're not alone in this trend of voter disengagement, voter skepticism. And so we need to be doing everything we can to encourage voting, to make voting easier. I've worked with young people across Canada looking at issues of youth civic engagement and lowering the voting age, actually, because there's actually a ton of research around the earlier you start voting, it'll become a habit, you keep on voting. It was really interesting. Some of the most common perceptions from young people were like, well, there's a perception of competence. So this I don't know enough yet to vote, but we don't actually vote. We don't require people to pass a test to vote, and really we should be reaching out to all Nova Scotians to encourage people to vote, to see why it's important. I think probably for all of us in this room, we were probably young voters. We've probably always voted, and it's hard to sort of understand where that reluctance comes from. So, I think these are some, reasonable, good updates. And just a couple of things I'd like to hear more about as the bill moves through. So there's one provision for merging polls when the traditional polls are getting smaller and smaller, but then just to think about accessibility, but sort of deep accessibility. So one example that I've been thinking about recently actually is Fort Massey United Church. As you know, the church building will be closed by this summer. It has been a traditional voting spot for the folks from McKean Manor, which is the senior social housing building across the road. And I think for a lot of those folks, they have mobility issues and obviously are low income. So, moving your place of voting farther away from where they are is going to make things more challenging. So what could we do to make that easier? So that's what I sort of saw at merging poll. Let's think about that. And I know Elections Nova Scotia has the IDEA Committee, which is looking at different diversity initiatives. And one of the things that we've been talking about is, in the last election, they did have what they were calling sort of special community polls. I think that's what they called them. So voting where it was more about creating a safe space and a welcoming space and a traditional community space where people felt that they could go. It wasn't necessarily aligned to your poll number within your district and that sort of thing. We for the 2S LGBTQI plus community, there wasn't a special poll, yet the issue of dead naming on the electoral roll is a huge deterrent. Making sure that that good work continues, that these changes facilitate that. But I think really thinking about civic engagement, civic education, how can we get people to engage in the democratic process? And that's all of our work. So thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Sydney, member 2.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today and speak at second reading of this bill, which proposes a series of targeted amendments to the Nova Scotia elections framework based on the final report from the last election. Broadly speaking, the changes before us are technical in nature and positive. They aim to streamline processes, remove outdated requirements, and provide clearer guidance to candidates, administrators, and voters alike. Many of these measures originate directly from Elections Nova Scotia. As such, they reflect practical operational experience. I think that anyone who went through the 2024 election can agree. Process changes are necessary, but I wish the government had gone further in implementing changes. I'm glad to see the changes like eliminating the $200 nomination deposit for candidates. This is a modest but meaningful change. Removing financial barriers, however small, can contribute to a more accessible democratic process and may encourage broader participation from individuals considering putting their names forward. We also see an increase in the threshold for candidate expense audits moving from $500 to $1,000. This adjustment reflects inflation and the rising costs of campaigning and may reduce administrative burden on both candidates and Elections Nova Scotia while still maintaining appropriate financial oversight. Another important integrity measure is the prohibition of of an individual serving as an official agent for more than one candidate in a given electoral riding. This change strengthens accountability and reduces the risk of conflicts of interest within the financial administration of campaigns. With respect to voting methods, the bill clarifies that internet voting remains limited to members of the Canadian Armed Forces and a narrow set of existing exceptions. We would have been glad to see more work done to expand access to voting. The last election saw just 45% voter turnout. This is a democratic crisis that needs to be addressed, and I don't see the government doing any work to address it. So I'll leave my notes for there, and appreciate the opportunity to say a few words.
I recognize the honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise at second reading on Bill 205 regarding changes to the Elections Act. I'll be very brief. I echo the comments of some of my colleagues around the positivity of some modernizations and streamlining measures that that appear in this bill, but there are a few things that I am curious about and may have some concerns about. Start first, I think, with one of the positives that I see, and that's the removal of the $200 deposit. I think we need to reduce barriers to participation in democracy, and that includes reducing barriers for people who want to run in elections and also for voters. And so the reduction or the removal of the deposit, I think, is a positive step. Similarly, I think the opportunity under Clause 5 to have a polling division in a residential centre, even when fewer than 10 electors reside there, is good if it has the effect of equally expanding access to polling. The concerns that I have around that are unless they're in a position, or unless we are in a position to see that applied equally, it could result in inconsistencies across districts, which I think wouldn't be equitable. Wanted to mention Clause 15 as well, which relates to how electors mark in write-in ballot polls. And my observation around that, anytime you have something that's not more automated or pre-entered, you do introduce possibilities for error, and that will require strong poll worker guidance and clear written instructions. We know that the availability of poll workers and the ability and time to train them was something that I think was an issue, so I think that's just something we need to be mindful of. I wanted to speak as well on Clause 27, and I know one of my colleagues, I think, spoke with support about that, and this is the clause that restricts the official agent limited to one candidate per electoral district. And the thing I'm wondering about with that is in areas with limited experienced agents, this may make it difficult for smaller parties or independents to access the services of an agent, which would create barriers for access to public office. So I'm really uncertain about that. I would like to hear more from government about how that may impact folks. Certainly my experience on that front is brand new. Or at least this lens of it. So I would be interested to learn more about whether it was considered whether the impact on small parties or independents was considered, and what the result of that was. I think that the last clause I wanted to speak to was Clause 29, and that was the no prospective candidate registration application after writ issued. Again, with that clause, it adds a timing bar, and I wonder if that might not also disadvantage late deciding candidates and independents. So I'll be very interested to hear government speak more about the impact of that. We need to increase voter participation. We need to increase democratic engagement. And so the measures in this bill that work towards that, I'm fully in support of. But I do think we really need to look through the lens of that as we continue to debate this, and I look forward to hearing government's comments.
I recognize the honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I rise to speak on second reading on Bill 205, an act to amend Chapter 5, the Acts of 2011, the Elections Act, and Chapter 1, 1992 supplement of the Revised Statutes, 1989, the House of Assembly Act. Madam Speaker, for the most part, I support most of the changes in here to the Elections Act, but there's a few glaring things that I think are missing that I want to point out. If the government were taking an opportunity to make amendments to the Election Act, it would have been a great time to make changes to create an even playing field for all Nova Scotians, so if they choose to put their name on the ballot. So, for example, Madam Speaker, I want to point out on Clause 29, where it refers to restricting the time for a prospective candidate to apply for registration as a registered candidate to the period before the writ. I want to talk about something that happens if you're an independent that should be fixed and amended in the Elections Act, and that is, once the writ is dropped, if you are not with a registered party, if you're an independent, you don't get your name on the ballot until after the first 14 days. So if someone is going to vote for you, if you're the only independent, then as long as they know how to spell your name, you're okay. But if there's more than one independent, that could pose a challenge, because it's challenging for people when they get to the voter box to know how to fill out the ballot sometimes. So I had a lot of people in my area really upset that my name wasn't on the ballot. And someone had suggested, well, create a party with your name in it so that then your name will be on the ballot, because it's only party names that are on the ballot for the first 14 days. But that is something that could have been amended here in the Elections Act, Madam Speaker. I agree with my colleague from Lunenburg West that the Elections Nova Scotia and this Elections Act should make every attempt to reduce all barriers. And there are many barriers for creating a level playing field. Madam Speaker, there is reference in this bill around signage, and for the most part, whoever purchases the signs is the one that owns the signs. It's not clear as an independent, if you decide not to be an independent anymore, do you have to provide your signs to the Receiver General, because they are an asset of your campaign. Right now, the current rules, which a lot of people wouldn't know unless they ran as an independent, and with Elections Nova Scotia, is that if there is any money in your bank account at the end of your campaign, it has to be given to the Receiver General. So if your supporters make donations over the amount of what you spend, you have to give all your donors money to the government. And you're not allowed to have an EDA, which has been challenged. And this would have been a great opportunity in Bill 205 to make those changes that are similar across the country. We've done research from all provinces and territories across the country, and most of them do allow independent candidates to have some sort of an association. But here in Nova Scotia, you're not allowed to have an electoral district association. And Elections Nova Scotia will also not allow you to issue tax receipts outside of the writ period. So what that means is if you have a lot of great supporters and they want to donate to your campaign, you can't give them a tax receipt. And so what that does, by the government keeping those rules, because the government's very aware of these rules, and they know that they put up barriers for more people running independently. The government could make changes here in Bill 205 that would allow all people in Nova Scotia to run a fairly and evenly without barriers. In my opinion, Madam Speaker, anyone running for office should be able to fundraise in the same manner, 12 months of the year. You should be able to open a bank account with your association name on it and provide tax receipts to your supporters. And by not allowing that, the government and political parties are putting up barriers to try and prevent independents from being successful. Thankfully, I had a strong base of supporters, so for me, it didn't affect it. In fact, my first campaign, I had so much support from around the province that the fourth week of my campaign, knowing that I would have to give extra money, any leftover money to the government, I asked my supporters to keep their money because we did everything we could to spend it. But we just had so much. And I didn't think it was fair to them to be giving me money and then me writing a check to the Receiver General with their hard-earned money. So that is, I'm bringing this up because this is an amendments to the Elections Act. There's quite a few in here. So it would be a really great opportunity to make changes to make it a level playing field. So, Madam Speaker, we do need to reduce barriers, and I really echo the comments of my colleague who spoke first around in trying to do everything we can to improve voter engagement and voter turnout, and doing everything we can there. Now, there is one clause in here, kind of all over the place with this bill, but there's a lot in here. There's one clause in here that I wanted to just make mention. It's clause 37, and it's around making it an offense to organize or participate in certain activities within 50 meters of a building in which a polling station is located or where voting is taking place. And I want to just say, one of my beefs and with Elections Nova Scotia, and they know it because I've talked to them about it, is we have rules and laws that often aren't enforced during elections. And there should be an ability for Elections Nova Scotia to actually enforce the legislation that they have in place. So in both of my last elections as an independent, in both cases, my opponent, first with the Liberal Party, Bill Casey, his campaign office was right beside the returning office, right beside, with big pictures. And so I called Elections Nova Scotia, and they said, well, he wrote and asked for permission. So I'm like, well, why did you grant it? There's plenty of office space in Amherst. He did not need to have an office right beside the returning office. And he would stand out in front of his office, or returning office, every day and shake people's hands as they were going in to vote. Those kinds of rules, you know, they told me they couldn't really do anything to enforce them. So that there's something that could have been amended in Bill 205. There should be an ability for enforcement of the rules in the Elections Act. Last election, my opponent that ran against me from the PC party, they put his campaign headquarters also right beside the returning office. It was in a different building than in 2021, but the exact same thing happened. Once again, I called Elections Nova Scotia, and once again they said they asked permission. So why do we even have these rules if they're not going to be enforced? So when I see this clause 37 about the 50-meter rule, who's going to enforce that? Because what my experience is in the past, when the rules are broken, they have not been enforced, Madam Speaker. So let me see, I've got a few notes here. Yeah, so I'll just summarize. I support these. I think there should be clarification on who owns the signs of a candidate if you're not with a political party. I think that's pretty obvious. If an EDA is the ones that purchases signs, and they're going to be the owners of signs. But if it's an independent, who owns those signs? Is it the Receiver General? Is it the government? And because any money, cash, is considered owned by the government. So some of the amendments that I would ask the government to consider in law amendments and committee of the whole House is to further reduce barriers by allowing independent candidates to issue tax receipts 12 months of the year. I would ask them to allow independents to form EDAs as other provinces and territories do. I would ask the government to make further changes to the Elections Act, which changes the rules that the first 14 days of the election, that there's no names on the ballot, because that, again, is a further barrier to independent candidates, because people go to vote and don't see their name. And that they do not have to give any unused campaign donations to the Receiver General. If the candidate loses, then maybe they have to give the money back to the donor. But to give it to the government doesn't seem right to me, Madam Speaker. And if the independent candidate is successful, then they should be allowed to keep that money in their bank account and to build for the next election, just like everyone else does that's with the political party. They're always building their war chest for the next election. You know, right now, Madam Speaker, I don't feel like it's fair to, like, people want to offer me donations, and I said, I can't issue a tax receipt until the next election. So I don't think that's it's fair to them. So I just ask the government to consider those, and I will table a couple of documents, Madam Speaker. These are letters. One is a letter I wrote to Elections Nova Scotia on April the 26th, 2023, which is making some of these requests. And I will table also a letter May 1st, 2023 that I received back denying the requests, and I'll table those documents. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
If I am to recognize the Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Justice, it will be to close second reading on Bill number 205. I recognize the Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleagues for their comments. I'm not going to address too many of them, but I will address one, and that's the question asked by the member from Lunenburg West about the official agents. Because we're taking the $200 registration fee off of candidates and trying to level the playing field, we are opening ourselves up to things like the longest ballot challenge, where you could have literally hundreds of people signed up, not necessarily from the riding, in some sort of protest or some sort of effort to kind of make a joke of an election in a particular constituency. We didn't want that to happen. So what happens in the longest ballot challenge is you'll have a number of candidates, up to hundreds, but there might be one official agent sign them all up and conduct that, because they're all working together. They may not even necessarily be from that area. What this does is, because we're moving to $200, it actually provides a hurdle up where if you're going to be a candidate in a riding, you have to have a single official agent, and that puts another hurdle up to stop people from kind of gaming the system. So that's why the Election Commission put that forward. And the last thing I'd like to say is I want to thank the Electoral Officer, Dorothy Rice, Chief Electoral Officer, and the Election Commission for the great work they did in consulting and coming forward with some amendments which make our system much more democratic, much more fair, and levels the playing field, and actually makes the administration of elections much more clean and easy. So I want to thank them, and I want to thank you, Madam Speaker, as well. And in closing,
I recognize the Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Justice.
And Speaker, I do move to close the debate on Bill number 205. Good Minister.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 205. Would all those in favor of the bill please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 205, an act to amend Chapter 5 of the Acts of 2011, the Elections Act, and Chapter 1, 1992 supplement of the Revised Statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
Order that the bill be referred to Standing Committee on Public Bills. I recognize the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 203, the House of Assembly Act?
Bill number 203, the House of Assembly Act. I recognize the Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in my place today, Speaker, to move that Bill 203, amendments to the House of Assembly Act, now be read a second time. Bill 203 implements the boundaries recommended by the 2025 Nova Scotia Electoral Boundaries Commission, which released its report on January 30th, 2026. This is a historic day for the House of Assembly. The legislation today will divide the current riding of Inverness into two. One will be an exceptional riding called Cheticamp, Marguerite, Pleasant Bay, to reflect the Acadian and French-speaking communities there. This will be an exceptional riding where the estimated number of electors in the electoral districts is more than 25% above or below the estimated average numbers of electors per district. The other riding will be called Inverness. The House of Assembly will grow to 56 members. I'm hoping there will be all-party support for the new Cheticamp riding. The legislation is prompted by the Nova Scotia Supreme Court ruling in a charter case. We respect the court's decision. We also respect the Acadian people for their rich culture Acadians were the first Europeans in Nova Scotia. Their life in the province has been marked by tragedy, perseverance, and bravery. Once this bill passes, we will have 4 protected ridings for Acadians: Argyll, Clare, Richmond, and Cheticamp, Marguerite, Pleasant Bay. A constituency needs a representative. Therefore, a by-election will be held in Cheticamp, Marguerite, Pleasant Bay as soon as possible once the bill passes and receives royal assent. For Inverness, the current member will continue to be the MLA until the next general election. With that, I'll take my place and hear what my colleagues have to say, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je suis contente de me lever afin d'offrir quelques réflexions quant à ce projet de loi. On ne peut pas raconter l'histoire de la Nouvelle-Écosse sans raconter celle des Acadiens. On tous connaît leur histoire. Il faut reconnaître leur détermination d'établir, de réétablir et d'accroître leur culture et leur communauté. Il s'agit d'une étape importante pour garantir que la voix de tous les néo-écossais soit entendue, et il est crucial que nous réunissions dans ce processus. La Cour suprême de la Nouvelle-Écosse a statué en 2024 que les limites électorales précédentes nécessiteraient pas une représentation adéquate des Acadiens et des francophones, une violation de l'article 3 de la Charte canadienne des droits et libertés. La Commission a conclu que les limites électorales devraient refléter l'identité linguistique et culturelle et le patrimoine unique des communautés acadiennes et francophones, afin qu'elles puissent influencer les décisions qui touchent leur vie et leur culture. Afin de refléter la voix de tous les électeurs dans la région, des élections partielles devraient avoir lieu dans les 2 nouvelles circonscriptions et non dans une seule. Nous devrions également procéder rapidement à une révision complète des limites des circonscriptions afin d'assurer une représentation équitable de tous les néo-écossais. Nous avons hâte de travailler avec les citoyens de Cheticamp, Marguerite, Pleasant Bay dans leur nouvelle circonscription afin que tous les Acadiens de la Nouvelle-Écosse. And I'll switch to English. You can't tell the story of Nova Scotia without telling the story of the Acadians, and we know their determination. We know their determination to establish their communities, to reestablish their communities, and to build communities and culture. The Supreme Court of Nova Scotia ruled in 2024 that previous electoral boundaries commissions had failed to provide adequate representation for Acadians and Francophones, a breach of Section 3 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Commission explicitly considered historical, cultural, and linguistic settlement patterns as justification for deviations from strict voter parity. This is an important step toward making sure all Nova Scotians have their voices heard, and it's crucial that we get this right. To reflect the voices of all electors in the area, we feel there should be by-elections in both new ridings, not just one. And we also feel that there should be a full boundary review early to ensure all Nova Scotians are fairly represented. We look forward to working with the people of the 2 new ridings and all Acadians and Francophones across Nova Scotia. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Sydney, member 2.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's a privilege to get up and speak on this bill as a Cape Brettoner and someone who's spent a lot of time throughout his life in the community of Cheticamp and surrounding areas with my family and with work. This bill establishes the riding of Cheticamp, Marguerite, Pleasant Bay, a new protected riding. And Madam Speaker, as I've said, I've been to Cheticamp many times as a Cape Brettoner. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I'm glad to see that the bill creates a new riding that respects and protects Acadian culture. And it will be very good to have a member from Cheticamp, Marguerite, Pleasant Bay in this House. Today is a good day for Acadians and a good day for Nova Scotians. Acadians are a distinct and vibrant culture in Nova Scotia, and Acadian communities have distinct needs that this House should consider. And as my former colleague from Clare, Ronnie LeBlanc, always says, if you don't live in an Acadian community, it's tough to understand what it's like. So we'll be very glad to see when this change takes effect. But there is some exceptions to this that we need to think about. And the fact of the matter is that with establishing a new riding, it does severely impact the current riding of Inverness. It takes a big chunk of the riding away, and some would argue that there should be a by-election in Inverness as well. We've asked for research, we've called legislative libraries, and there hasn't been a scenario where that wasn't the case. We haven't found one yet. The situation is unprecedented. In Nova Scotia, in almost 100 by-elections that have occurred since Confederation, there's never been a case where a seat changed this much and the other riding wasn't impacted. In fact, we don't believe the situation has ever happened in Canada. And we've asked legislative libraries, as I said, across the country. Nobody's yet found a case where this has happened. It's because the clause goes against the fundamental principles of representative democracy, and it's something that the House should need to debate, whether it's Inverness or any other riding across the province. There's another issue I want to also raise. And the Boundary Commission called for the riding to be called Inverness-Waikaghama. And I don't understand why the government would not want the First Nations name represented in the riding. It is no different than Sydney Membertou. When the proposal came to call it Sydney, many of the advocates came forward and said Membertou is such a significant part of who we are, and it should be represented in the name of the riding. And why the government is not taking that recommendation from the report is insulting to First Nations communities. It is. That name should be in the riding. So, and the government should honor it. So with those, we're going to have lots to say. My colleague will have more to say as we move forward. But first and foremost, we're so happy to see this new Acadian riding coming. This is more representation for the Acadian community. It's also another representation seat for Cape Breton Island too as well. But we need to have a serious conversation about this. It would be no different if Membertou was removed from Sydney. It significantly changes the riding, and we get the mandate from the people in the riding in which we put our names on. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I look forward to the debate as we move forward.
If I am to recognize the Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Justice, it will be to close debate on Bill 203. The Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Justice.
Well, Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues across the aisle for their comments. Speaker, I move to close debate on Bill number 203.
The motion is for second reading on Bill number 203. House of Assembly Act, an act to amend. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 203, an act to amend Chapter 1, 1992 Supplement of the Revised Statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Standing Committee on Public Bills. I recognize the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 200, the Cannabis Control Act?
Bill number 200, the Cannabis Control Act. I recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is really one of those moments where we go, makes you go, So, Bill 200, an act to amend the Cannabis Control Act. I have a ton of questions, and I'm hoping that the minister can address some of these things. But first, I kind of want to go through what's changing here. I mean, what this means. This bill further moves to eliminate the sale of cannabis outside of NSLC locations. The amendments are made to the Cannabis Control Act to strengthen enforcement and streamline prosecution. This will mean additional offenses, updated penalties, and more enforcement. And we continue to have questions about whether these decisions are grounded in evidence and how they will impact Indigenous communities. So, you know, we've been hearing a lot. You know what? I'm just going to go back. Let's just talk about, here we go, once again, with my consultation conversation. How we jump the, what is it? The horse before the cart, or whatever that meaning is. We put the horse before the cart, and either way, doesn't really matter. if we're riding a horse, yes. But you know what I mean. So I just will, Madam Speaker, I'll just continue on. The whole point of making sure that we put forward proper legislation is that we think of the people in the communities that this is going to affect and how this is going to impact people. And, you know, I said when I started off, I have a number of questions. A number of questions when it comes to how did we get here? And what does this look like? We talked about last night how it's important to make sure, and I listened to the minister last night when he mentioned it was about safety and the impact of illegal narcotics and blah, 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 danger to public safety. All of these things are important. Not saying that they're not important, because they really are. And absolutely, we need to figure out a way to do things in the proper way to make sure that it is regulated and safe for all folks to be able to partake of properly. But I do wonder why these changes are coming about and why there are amendments coming forward to strengthen enforcement and public safety. Now, I'm curious to know if there's any evidence that the minister could put forward here, specifically in Nova Scotia, about you know, some of the conversations that were had by this minister and as well by the premier about some of the things about human trafficking and you know, fentanyl and things. I'm just curious to know why now and what this means. So my thought is, was the communities that are going to be affected or going to be impacted by these changes consulted? Have we talked to anyone in the African Nova Scotian community? Have we talked to the Indigenous communities? Have we talked to, you know, communities about what this looks like and what these impacts on enforcement will look like for people that are of Indigenous and African Nova Scotian ancestry? Because when we think about enforcement, we think about policing, and policing hasn't always been positive in our communities. So, you know, we want to make sure that we're keeping Nova Scotians safe, absolutely, but we also want to be very mindful of the approach that we take and what that looks like. Because there's also a piece in there that talks about potential new enforcement officers. It raises questions for me about who these officers will be and how enforcement will be managed. And, you know, I'm saying this as a Black woman because you know, I have young Black children and I have young Black men in my household. And I know I've said this in this house before, but you know, some people in this house don't actually have to tell their children that they have to be very mindful, respectful, and careful when they leave their household, because they are not seen in the same way as everybody else by the enforcement officials of our province. So keep your hands above your head. You know, say don't shoot, I don't have anything. Like, these are real life experiences that we have to tell Black children and probably Indigenous children that are the reality when they walk out of our doors every single day. So I say this because when I see an enforcement, and especially when I've seen some of the lack of communication and lack of support and lack of resources that this government continues to not give our Indigenous communities, and now we're seeing it happening within our African Nova Scotian communities, it also sparks a red flag in myself, but I know I'm not alone in thinking that this is an issue or a possible issue that can happen. And you know what? I speak from experience, so this is my real life experience, and I want to be very clear that enforcement has never been a positive situation for me. So I'm bringing that up because, you know, when we think about cannabis control, you know, yes, the safety factor, yes, we want to make sure that it is properly regulated. We want to make sure these things are in place, but I also, when I think about enforcement and what the effects of, you know, what this might look like for our communities, it worries me. So I want to bring this to the minister's attention. Because this bill will give the minister the power to designate persons other than police officers to enforce the Cannabis Control Act. And I know that it already happens. It already exists for illegal tobacco. So I know that this happens, and I worry once again when we have peace officers that are not trained properly, that are not educated or culturally competent, that this can be a scary situation. And I know I'm taking it to a level of and well, and it's not dramatic, it's real life experience, but some people in this room may not understand what that looks like. And a lot of people in this room may not understand what that looks like. So I'm speaking because I feel like when we put forward bills that are going to affect and impact our communities in ways that are going to be detrimental, and we've seen this by the over-policing, we've seen this by, you know, the disproportionate amount of African Nova Scotians who are incarcerated, the African males incarcerated, Indigenous males and women incarcerated, that we have to be very mindful about how we put forward legislation and what that's going to look like without those voices included in the preparation of this legislation. So I bring this question forward to the minister about who was consulted when or if or how you're going to create these enforcement practices or units. And how many folks that look like me or look like folks in the Indigenous community are going to be advising the minister on what this is going to look like culturally. And yeah, I just think about these things because we're putting forward things that to me doesn't make sense at this point in time, especially when we see communities that are asking for this government to help them with support, mental health supports. We see our Indigenous communities that are asking this government to come and have conversations with them to see how we can work together to help each other. And now we're seeing even more heavy-handedness when it comes to legislation that's being put forward. And you know what? I really want to think that people might be naive to think that these are not being put forward, legislation is not being put forward with that intent or that thought. But I have to be very, very straight with what I'm saying. Because we've seen legislation come across this floor that harm our Indigenous folks when it comes to Hunter's Mountain. We see legislation that comes across this floor that fines people for doing the things that they are supposed to be doing within their own culture and within their own communities because this government wants something else on the land or doesn't want them there while they're trying to do something that no one seems to want to tell us the actions behind that. So I want to be very clear and concise because we have a number of people in this province who are watching our every move, who are challenging this government's decisions in multiple facets and are asking for this government to listen, asking for folks who are making decisions and creating impacts in these communities' lives to listen and understand. And yet we continue to see time and time again the disregard, the disrespect, and the plain, not even a conversation, to be had about changes and what this might look like for their community. So I'm gonna pull back because I have a lot of questions, and you know, I question what these special enforcement officers will look like. I question why now. I question, you know, who else has input on this bill, and are we open to amending it to include all voices around the table? It also adjusts maximum penalty amounts for offenses and sets minimum penalties for offenses. So I also want to know, how will this be measured? What is this going to look like? How are these changes going to impact our communities across Nova Scotia? And what safeguards will be in place for our communities? Because we know that policing for me is a huge issue. And me and the minister have talked at length about policing. And I feel like, you know, it's really interesting that when it comes to racism and policing, you know, the conversation is led that I don't direct what the police do, and I don't have any oversight over that type of interactions. But then here we see that, you know, the minister, you can make a directive to make them do certain things, but you can't, you know, or I can't understand why, you know, when there is racism happening to police or outside of that, there's nothing that we can do other than send it to the Human Rights Commission. So I'm really like, you know, trying to wrap my head around, you know, what this is going to look like. And I see so many red flags and so many issues with this. There are some good pieces, absolutely. I'm not going to disregard that because safety is paramount. And we want to make sure that folks are safe when it comes to, you know, illegal narcotics and the impact of that. And we do want to have regulations in place. But, you know, I have to think about my brothers and sisters in the Mi'kmaq community. I have to think about my African Nova Scotian communities who have been heavily policed for a long, long time and continue to be in many different facets. And it's really, really troubling for me. So I want to bring back, you know, the potential effects on Black and Indigenous people. You know, enforcement and criminal justice. I mean, some people may not be aware. And so I'm trying to give you some insight and some actually heart-to-heart feelings on what this looks like for some of our communities here in Nova Scotia. There's higher enforcement powers plus fines that equals risks of disproportionate impacts. We've already seen it in our jails. We see it, you know, in the way that we police. And even though some folks are saying it's getting better, you know, those that are experiencing this lived reality, it is not. Just to let you know. And it's really hard for folks to really believe in a system that is not actually completely on our side all the time. So, you know, Blacks historically experience higher rates of policing, arrests, and enforcement for drug-related offenses. Expanding enforcement authorities, making the enforcement roles broader, can create new offenses, mandatory minimum penalties, which is what I just mentioned. They can lead to more interactions with law enforcement for people selling or distributing cannabis, you know, when they are allowed to. I talked about that, about the disproportionate pieces. You know, there was a piece in there that said that Mi'kmaq communities can partner with the NSLC. And I think, you know, it would be good to know what our Mi'kmaq brothers and sisters feel and how this will affect them if they don't agree or if they have a different opinion on how this might work. Because as we know, when we shouldn't be told how to do the work that we do, we should be supported in doing the work that we do. And, you know, in our Black communities, it says for us, by us, right? I think that's the same for our Indigenous folks. It should be for us, by us. And then what does that look like when it comes to self-sustaining an economy, right? Like, we have to really start putting things in perspective, because we also have to remember that we are on an unceded territory, and these are the Mi'kmaq lands, and we have to be respectful, because we are visitors on this land, and we are settlers of this land. And we are you know, we have to make sure that we're consulting in the right way, respectfully, with all folks. So I want to point out the equity, health, and historical context. The legacy of cannabis prohibition disproportionately affected Black and Indigenous communities. So historical policing and the war on drugs policies led to higher arrests and convictions among Black and Indigenous Canadians. Even though cannabis was legalized, we know, many of these historical harms, which are criminal records, economic exclusion, community distrust of law enforcement, they persist. It's not a surprise, because it still continues on. So, you know, the government, I feel, has a long way to go when it comes to building up that relationship again, and we can't rush that. And I don't want us to forget that, you know, just because we do one thing good doesn't mean that it makes it okay. I used to have this saying, because I used to be an in-between between stakeholders and community. And I used to tell folks, just because you're here for a year doesn't mean you're in. Believe you me, it's going to take you a couple years or a couple decades before people feel comfortable enough to trust you, because of the harms that have happened in their communities for so long. So, you know, I want to make sure that we understand what that looks like. I also have questions about, and I mentioned this, about the enforcement powers and fines and what that's going to look like. So I hope the minister can clarify that, because I think those are important pieces that our communities will want to know, and folks across this province will want to know, especially when it comes to what this is going to look like when there are enforcement branches or units in place. Over-policing means stricter laws could continue to unequal impacts unless paired with restorative and certain types of policy. So I want the minister to think about that and what can be done. Maybe there are some ways through the system, and I know that even with policing, they have a lot of things that they need to work on when it comes to anti-Black racism, and tons of training needs to be had. So there's a lot of work to be done with that as well. But I want to also point out that some of the things that stand out for me are that it's primarily about enforcement and fines and not social equity. So what are the communities benefiting? If there are communities that are involved in this business, how will they benefit? Will they be included? What is that going to look like? What are the opportunities for social equity? Because meaningful change towards equity involves community-driven policymaking, supporting community, whether it's mental health supports, whether it's resources, all of these pieces that some of our communities have been asking for, and the government still has yet to respond on what that looks like for supports for our communities. And we need to make sure that we look at culturally appropriate public education and regulatory support. So I did a dive on what officers will look like, because to me that was something that stood out, and I mentioned that earlier. And it said they would be like similar to the ones that do the tobacco control or that type of control. And you know, I just want the minister to think about that and what that looks like. So, moving back into the bill, It also says that judges are also being limited in their ability to reduce penalties at their discretion. So judges could previously reduce the amount of the penalty that would cause unreasonable harm to marginalized individuals. You know, I talked about that and how we are over-policed and how this can affect folks negatively. And I want to make sure that, you know, as we move forward, and I'm hoping that folks are watching and are listening, that they come forward and give their feedback when it comes down to when we bring this forward moving. You know, I also want, it also means that it's going to speed up prosecution. The cannabis that is believed to have been illegally sold or distributed no longer has to be run through testing. Prosecutions can be based on appearance or odor. Now, I mean, I don't know about, because I've never smoked weed in my life, so I know that it does, you know, have a strong odor, but people that smoke cigarettes have a strong odor, and we know what that odor is. Just because you may smell like it doesn't necessarily mean that you have it or you carry it. It could be that you were by somebody that was smoking, and that could cause that same thing. So I also want, you know, to put that out there, because it's not something that is obviously assumed, right? We want to make sure that we're doing, you know, it in the right way, so that we're not targeting folks for the wrong reasons. And as we know, you know, we've seen this happen in community, you know, mistaken identity, or, you know, you look like, or you're driving a car that is supposedly look like, but you're not, or driving while black, or any of those things. And, you know, there's an assumption made, and that's not the case. So I just want us to be mindful of that, because that is also can be an issue when it comes to prosecutions can be based on appearance or odor. My colleague from Shabakto, Halifax Shabakto, wanted me to ask about commercial supports, because my colleague in here was talking about, you know, commercial supports for small businesses, and we didn't see any movement on that when it comes to small businesses. But here we can see that the minister can, where's it at? That the minister can prohibit, this bill prohibits landlords from allowing premises to be used to sell cannabis. The bill also seeks to fine landlords who knowingly allow unregulated cannabis dispensaries to operate on the property. The new fine will be between $5,000 to $25,000. You know what would be really good? And I just say this because, you know, when we're talking about landlords who are doing things that are knowingly improper, it would be really nice if we could do that through our enforcement branch for residential tenancies, and also have a commercial branch as well to do that work, because we can see it can happen. It can be translated through the justice system. So it'd be absolutely wonderful. And I appreciate the fact that we have, you know, folks still in the room and able to hear that this is something that can happen. And you know, this could give landlords another reason to discriminate against tenants, which is also a bad thing. But if we have an enforcement branch, it would actually be super beneficial for all aspects. So, you know, residential tenancy and the justice system could work together. This is also another piece where maybe a possibility that the residential tenancies, Service Nova Scotia and Justice could work together, and the omnibus bill could have been put in, this could have been put in here as an amendment, and then we would have had something really to work with when it comes to housing and residential tenancy. So the bill, like I said, prohibits landlords from allowing premises to be used to sell cannabis. And this bill also seeks to fine landlords who knowingly allow unregulated cannabis dispensaries to operate on their property. So this is a really good piece when we think about adapting it to commercial businesses, as my colleague from Halifax Shabakto said, because she's been asking about this for a long time, about commercial supports for small businesses and how that would look like for you know, enforcement and making sure that we're doing the right thing. So I also want to bring up something that I kind of want to ask about, because I feel like the reason why some of our communities mistrust some of the things that are put forward here in this House, or don't believe that they have the best interests at heart when it comes to some pieces of legislation. You know, we heard the minister talk in December about that there had been a big increase in cannabis stores, claiming that there are now more than twice as many illegal shops as legal ones. And to address this, he issued a directive to all police agencies in the province to prioritize cannabis enforcement to crack down on unregulated sellers. So this is where consultation comes into play. And as we know, consultation can come in many forms. You know, it could have been a phone call, could have been a meeting, could have been a public forum. We could have, there could have been a conversation with the chiefs and with the communities on what this looks like. And so because of that, a few days later, the Nova Scotia RCMP said that they have no plans to change their approach to tackling illegal cannabis in the province, because this is where the conversations could have worked out if we had had these talks earlier, before we, you know, did the cart before the horse, per se. And then I'm just curious to know, has there been any change? Has there been any conversations with RCMP and with policing when it comes to illegal cannabis stores? And have we had any cultural competency training when it comes to how we address and have conversations in these particular communities? And then I also want to bring up, like, you know, Minister Arms, excuse me, the minister announced the new directive. After the minister announced the new directive, our premier also said that they've talked to people in law enforcement who have told them that in this province they've taken illegal cannabis from unregulated illegal dispensaries and tested it and found that it was laced with traces of fentanyl. And I also want to say again that the Nova Scotia RCMP responded by saying it's not aware of any fentanyl-laced cannabis being sold by unauthorized cannabis retailers in this province. So once again, that's another piece that we also want to make sure that we're not misleading folks and making people feel like there's a rush to do certain things because this is something that's coming forward. And I also want to say that our premier also claimed that there was a link between illegal cannabis and human trafficking in this province. And I mean, when we say these things, and I know some, you know, I feel the same way as some other folks when we say things that can be very, it can heighten people's, you know, awareness in ways that are not accurate. And, you know, I just want to say that RCMP superintendent said that he counts both cannabis and human trafficking as significant issues in Nova Scotia, but he has seen no evidence to suggest the two issues are linked. And the HRP said that it's not investigating any files where human trafficking and unregulated cannabis sales are connected. So I want us to be very aware of the messaging that we put forward, and as well why we do the things we do. If this is something, clearly, we know it's because of safety, and we want to do what's right and keep this out of the hands of our young people so that harm doesn't happen, and we get that. But we also want to make sure that, you know, it's legal for a reason. Clearly, there's been studies done. There's things that have been done that speak to that. So I implore the minister to make sure that we have all of our facts and all of the information and the data in place so that we know what that looks like. I will say that, you know, and this is coming from my community work, what we would always say, because, you know, we've had a number of issues in community, in our small communities where, you know, we want to keep our kids safe. We want to make sure that they're not doing things that they shouldn't be doing, whether it be legal or illegal. We want to make sure that they're safe regardless. And you know what helps these communities? And I'll use an example. having programs and funding programs in communities that keep kids off the street, that allow them to have, choices to do things outside of making bad decisions and helping them create good choices in life and teaching them how to do these things through life skills or programs that will allow them to really explore who they are outside of any type of negative connotation. So I put that out there, but I know that there's a lot of cuts to this budget, specifically on programming for our young people and community, and specifically for our students, and specifically for our culture and communities and arts people, and specifically for, oh my goodness, like the libraries and the museums, the things that people could go to in order for them not to get in trouble and to kind of get themselves away from that. Dance programs, there's a lot of things that we could be investing in or continue to invest in that would keep our kids safe and entertained and engaged and away from those negative, options in life to kind of help build them up. And that goes with arts and culture. I mean, I'm an arts and culture baby too, so I understand. But I want to bring back the fact that it's really important for us, and it's important for us as legislators to hear from folks. And I know that the minister and everyone in this room, actually, because I'm CC'd on most of these emails, or BCC'd on a lot of the emails. So I know for a fact that a lot of folks in this room are getting emails about the effects of what these pieces of legislation are going to, how they're going to impact these communities and our own communities, our own people. And I really feel like, we have to do our due diligence and pay attention and really focus on what's important. So I want to make sure that, we understand what this looks like. And I mean, a lot of us, like I said, and I was really glad to hear the member from Lunenburg West. I was very actually taken aback when the member went line by line through the legislation. I think there are multiple times when we're in this space, and we have time in here. So, there's lots of opportunities for us to really take a deep dive. Sorry, excuse me. Have a deep dive in the legislation that's being put forward here. Some of us, are okay with the status quo, and we trust what's being put forward, and some of us really don't, because we've seen time after time how legislation can miss key pieces. It could be a word that's not in there that is actually detrimental to what the piece of legislation is about. And so I applaud my colleague from Lunenburg West when they went through every line to kind of discuss what that looks like, because, we want to make sure that what we put forward here in this House are, thank you. We want to make sure that what we're doing is the best work for all Nova Scotians. So, getting back to some of these key messages that I want to make sure that everybody knows about. Oh, I do. We agree that we want to keep all Nova Scotians safe with cannabis control. We can agree on that. But I also want us to remember how we get there, and how the minister and how the party or the governing body sees things may be a lot different than the way that I may see it and my community sees it. And like I said, what stands out for me may not be something that anybody in this House ever experiences. I'm going to give you an example because I feel like, you got to visualize it before, you really understand. So I grew up in a community where, policing is prevalent. The community policing is there. And they did target a number of folks, so much so that I became a person in community who did the crisis work, who had built really good relationships with police so that we could mitigate a lot of issues that were happening in community without any brutal force. And this all came about because one day in the broad daylight, there was a call made by somebody about a young man who was, I want to say maybe 16 at the time. And was he doing wrong? I don't know. Did he get charged? No, he didn't. But because he looked like somebody and he had a backpack, he was chased down with AK-47s through a community in broad daylight by 5 officers while there were children playing in a playground and right past all of us. And what do you think would be the initial reaction? Panic, right? We have babies outside. They have guns. They're running. AK-47s aren't little small pistols. Them things are like strapped around you with the full vest. Like, this is serious business, right? And as a mom, and I have young children at the time, as a mom, watching that was so scary. My mindset was like, get every kid in the house. I had like 8 children that weren't even mine in my home because I needed to know what's going on and why do we have 5 officers with AK-47s running through our community. For a kid with a backpack because he looks like someone that is possibly doing something. Now, I say this because my crisis work led me to being able to have really good relationships with police officers. Enough so that whenever an officer came into community, they came to my house and they asked me, could you call folks and let them know that we are here? Because when they come in our black communities, they don't put the sirens on. They come in, they got the lights going, and then they run through community, guns a-blazing. So I earned a respect, and there was a group of us that did this as concerned parents, and they literally would give us a heads up. Just even if it was a text, we got a call from the watch commander and we're like, we're coming in the community, we need to let you know, get kids inside, blah, blah, blah. Or we would have that same respect if there was a situation going on and we seen things going on and we seen, parents hysterics and whatever, we would mitigate that as community members and hold people away from the situation because we don't want any other harms to happen. And then it was easier. So we gained a really good relationship by working with these folks and them understanding what our community was about. It was about care. After all of that stuff, we had less police interactions. And when we did, they came for the good times. They didn't come for the times where they had to run through. And when they did do these types of things, they listened. So I had witnessed, well, my daughter witnessed, and then she yelled at me through the window, but I had witnessed a young man being bit up by a German Shepherd 3 doors down from my house while an officer was standing there and he was in handcuffs on the ground being bit to shreds. Like, I kid you not. And I came down the steps and I said, please, officer, get the dog off the young man. He's in cuffs. He's already in cuffs. There's nothing more that you need to do. Move the dog and then pick him up off the ground. No. He let the dog bite his whole bottom leg up to the top of his behind. And then when they took him down to the car, they wouldn't let his parents speak to him. So because I have a good relationship, I said, who's your watch commander? At that point, we knew what was going on, and they told us, and it was addressed. Now, mind you, this young person is traumatized because when he see me the next day, he came to my office in community and he said, Susie, look what happened. And mind you, this is a young man. I didn't want to look at his leg, but he pulled his pants down and showed me his butt to his leg, bruised, bit, torn to shreds. This is why it's important for us to be very mindful of what we put forward and how we create these types of situations. So I say this because people need to understand the reality and the lived reality of a lot of communities across this province, not just Black communities, not just Indigenous communities across this province. And we need to be very mindful of how we legislate things with each and every one of them in mind. So I want, and I didn't mean to say it in a way to like create, like a bustle of anything. I need you to understand why I say the things I say, and I understand the care and the reason and the safety behind why we need certain things. But we also have to be very mindful, and I can speak from the African Nova Scotian experience, that it doesn't look like that in my community. And I want folks in this room to understand that that's my lived reality, and many others that look like me live reality. And some folks in this room may not ever experience that or see that or get that same reaction. So, I put that out there so folks have an understanding of why I say the things I say and why it's so important, because we are talking about not just young people. We're talking about community members. We're talking about our Indigenous communities. We're talking about our African Nova Scotian communities. We're talking about our Acadian communities. We're talking about all walks of life. Newcomer families. We have to be very mindful and culturally competent when we think about putting forward legislation that's going to impact these communities. So, I want us to be very clear that we need to absolutely keep our communities safe, keep our young people and our elders and all folks in Nova Scotia safe when it comes to the sale of cannabis and cannabis control. But I also want us to be very aware of some of the nuances that can happen when we put forward legislation without consultation. So, like I said, I would be very keen to know, these are a few of my questions, what consultation has been done? Has our communities been included in that? And I'm using specifically African Nova Scotian communities and Indigenous communities. And I'd love to hear, if there's any robust conversation, if there's been any feedback, or if there's been any thoughts on how we do things differently in communities, because it has to be for us, by us. We have to be there as support. As government steps into roles where it's going to affect our communities, what is that going to look like? Are we going to give these communities the resources that they need? I know that some of our communities have been asking for mental health resources, have been asking us for addictions resources and help. And these are all really valid pieces in order for us to continue this work to control and to keep everyone safe, to keep everyone safe through the Cannabis Control Act, sorry. I want to touch upon trust. And I've talked about this in length throughout this whole process since we've been here. And I say this because, it's African Heritage Month, and there are tons of cuts happening in our communities. And so the trust level is like a, and I just need folks to understand that you can't make changes without the people included in those changes. And so this is one of those pieces. We know, and we've heard, and I've also gotten word that, we have folks from our Indigenous communities that have been asking for conversations, have been asking for, a one-on-one, a tete-a-tete, whatever you want to call it, so that things can be done in the proper manner through a collaborative approach. And I'm curious to know where we are on that and why we're moving forward with things without all of our ducks in a row. And I think, this is also another example of why it's important for us to do the collaboration and conversation before we get to this point. And I just want to say, if the talks and the conversations and the community meetings and the forums and the surveys and the letter writing and the pigeon flying in the air to give you messages didn't happen, then what could have happened? Because I think we can't start anywheres or bring forward anything without even knowing from the people that it's going to impact the most. I think this is a prime example of why, we talk a lot in this house about lack of consultation, why it's important for us to talk about why these budget cuts are happening, where's this money being spent, what's going on, and then we have communities asking for resources, asking for help, asking for the government to step in ways that are guided by them, and then we hear crickets. We hear nothing. Or it isn't what the government or folks that are in government are used to, because sometimes our communities can be, and I'm not going to say challenging because we are amazing, but sometimes our communities haven't had that belief in things being done good. And I talked about that earlier today in another piece, because we haven't seen that. We haven't seen, our communities haven't seen the government doing amazing things for us. We see them taking things from us and fining us and policing us and doing all of these things, because the Western world is not the way that we've been accustomed to. And it doesn't matter how long we've been here, we still have cultures. We still have ways of being. We still have things that we do differently. And we want to encourage folks, which is why, we talk and we have collaborations, we have meetings, we have consultations, so that we can get to know one another and be able to work together collaboratively. Listen, I am the most collaborative person in this room. I am probably, super positive, even on a late evening, because after 8 o'clock, I typically am not. But I am at work, and I'm very respectful of my time and my space here. But I feel like when I have to speak for a long period of time to express my concern and even my thoughts, and have some serious questions about this particular piece of legislation, I feel like this is an opportunity for us to have this conversation and change the way we do things. Because I'm sharing with folks in this room things that are happening, that have happened, that me as a Black woman, that I have Black children, I have to experience every day of my life. Like when my boys go out the house, I have to worry whether or not something's gonna happen to them, whether or not they're gonna get pulled over. I have to look at my phone every hour to make sure that, something's not happening to my children. And I know we all worry about our kids, but I have like an extra burden because I have a Black son. I actually have 3 Black sons, but I'm saying I have 2 that are adults. So when they leave my house and they go downtown, when they leave my house and go away, I worry. And for good reason, because the system is not designed for us. And as much as we want to be able to say we are making progress, we see time and time again, and we're seeing it now, I don't even want to call them our cousins. They are like far removed family in the United States. But I'm saying, it is a scary place. It's a scary place. And I want us to not be like that. I want us to be very mindful and respectful and honor the first peoples of this land. Honor those folks that have come here, who have built their lives and who have really worked hard to make this legacy a good legacy for our communities. For those folks who have been exiled and came back, I want us to really embrace these cultures that make us, as Nova Scotia, a beautiful place, without having people on the sidelines feeling like, here we go again. There's another piece of legislation that is never going to benefit me. Or a piece of legislation that I'm gonna have to tell my kids now they can't go past 8. Or it's getting dark, don't drive, in these areas. I really wish that we could get to a point where when the minister brings forward a piece of legislation, me and the minister could have a conversation. I say, listen, minister, these are some of my issues. I need to tell you this because this is important to me, and my community is saying this, and I just really want you to just take it in. And I feel like we can do that, but there's also a restriction when it comes to how we legislate in here that shouldn't be. We should be able to share that information back and forth. We should be able to see how we can help each other and do the best work. And I think, you know, for whatever reasons, party lines aside, any other thing, listen, I'm a part of a number of groups that we are nonpartisan, even though we are we all have party lines. But when there's a cause in place, when it's housing, when it's education, when it's immigration, when it's anything that has to do with our people as a whole, we stand united and are strong in that because we want the best for everyone. And I think when we start thinking like that, things will change. We will see a different dynamic. This room will not feel like you have to, and we have to, you know, there's times where we feel like we have to plea and like put everything on the table for folks to truly understand what this looks like. And then we have folks to come in public bills, pour out their hearts, tell us all of their stories in 5 minutes, cut it off, but like, we're asking Nova Scotians to carry loads when we are a government that are supposed to be helping make these decisions and choices and legislation for people across this province. And when we don't collaborate, when we don't talk, when we don't include everyone, the legislation falls flat and it gets criticized and it gets feedback and it's gonna get tons of conversation about why it needs to change. And I will say, you know what? I have a really good working relationship with the minister, and I have had multiple conversations. And so I feel like, you know, these are opportunities for us to get to know why it's important to do this work and why we do it the way we do, why we're here at certain hours of the night, you know, pouring out our hearts with the fire of our communities so that you have an understanding of why we feel the way we do. And you know what? It may take us an hour. Sometimes it takes us longer or less. But it's important to us because this is our time to talk about what's important to our communities, to our people, to what Nova Scotians think and expect from us here in this house. So I say these things because, I mean, there are some really good things in this piece that I will say I've spoken to the minister about and the minister has heard. But I also have some things that I want the minister to really think about, and as well the party, the governing party, to think about, because you essentially make the decision when we get to the vote. And I need folks to open their ears when people are coming forward, when they are talking to you, when they are pouring out their heart, because we are in tough times. It's only gonna get worse because things are going to be cut, and things are already starting to change for a lot of communities. And I say this because we talked about this earlier. The African Nova Scotian communities and the Indigenous communities are going to feel the brunt of this. Even though folks in this room may not feel that way or think it's all across the board, you know, all of these cuts to programs are going to affect all of our young people. It's going to create barriers and even more possible generational harm, because they're going to lose out and they're not going to have the things that they should have, because we are a province where we can be doing better, and we have seen that we've done some really good things in here. But we are on tough times, and we don't want to make it any worse for our system. We know the justice system is overwhelmed. We know the Human Rights Commission is overwhelmed. We know that a lot of our systems right now are overworked and overwhelmed. We talked about social workers last night. We need to stop adding more onto the people and the folks that are doing great work. And we need to start thinking about how we implement that across our legislation. What are we doing to make Nova Scotians' lives better? Is this something that we really need to be doing in this fashion without consultation before we even talk to anybody about how this looks? And I want to also say that, you know, we hear oftentimes in this house that, you know, we'll talk to them after the bills pass, or we'll talk to them after, we go through regulations or whatever. We'll have conversations then. And, you know, think about it from this perspective. From communities who have always been disenfranchised, communities who have been marginalized, communities that didn't have, communities that had their whole generational wealth taken from them, communities that experience environmental racism and sickness and health concerns, communities in this province to this day that still experience this. Imagine how they feel when we put forward a bill without any talk to them. Do you think they want to talk to us after that? Do you think they trust us? Do you think they want to even consider that we're doing good work for folks? And I believe we are, in ways. But do you think that our communities have faith in us to represent them, to be here, to do good work, especially African Nova Scotian communities, Indigenous communities, when they've never been included in the conversation, they've never had a seat at the table, and when they do, the legs are gone. So I need to implore folks in this room, we need to think about it from different perspectives. We got to think about the mental health impacts. We got to think about the addiction impacts. We got to think about, the policing impacts. We have to think about it from all aspects, because when we don't, there's going to be a lot of folks on the margins, and those folks are going to be the ones that are impacted the most, and we don't want that. We don't want to see more of our folks in the justice system. We don't want to see more of our folks being left behind. We don't want to see more of our young people being treated or mistreated. We don't want to see any of that. We want a province where everybody can strive and thrive, and I believe that we can do that. I just really feel like I wish that we could do this together, and that, to me, would be an ideal situation if we could all have a conversation together and collaborate and work towards a better way of doing the work that we do here, because it's only going to create even more and more separation from folks that you really need to have on your side, because they're the ones that are going to feel the brunt of this, even after we're in and out of here, even after generations. I mean, I just think about, the tons of things that we've brought forward here, even just in this short couple days, and how this is impacting the lives of marginalized students, of communities. And here we continue to add on more layers of things that are going to impact these communities and the people that are going to be harmed the most. So I need folks to think about it. I appreciate the fact that folks are listening, and I hope that you've gained a better understanding, because I don't stand here without some sort of expertise when it comes to the work that is happening in our communities, and I feel like those are the communities that are being left out of all these conversations, and that's not what we want. I stand here saying that I will commit to have these conversations in communities and bring them forward here in this House. And I would hope that each and every one of you do the same for your communities. Because I said we have 52 Black communities in this province. Each and every one of them touch one of our ridings. That's right. I would like to think that you could walk into each and every one of them and feel proud that you're doing great work for them. But I can tell you, I can lift my head up, because I'm going to the gala and it's going to be great. But I'm saying, I just want to say that I hope that we come in here with that same mindset, to feel proud that we're representing the people of our province, because I do. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to all the members for contributing to the debate tonight on Bill 200. At this time, I'd like to move to adjourn debate.
The motion is to adjourn debate on Bill 200. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Speaker, this concludes government business for
hours.
Oh.
Wow. Sorry.
No. Okay. Speaker, this concludes government business for today. I move that the host do now rise to meet again on Monday, March 2nd, between the hours of 3 p.m. and 11:59 p.m. Public bills will begin at 11 a.m. Notice has gone out, I understand, from the clerk, and following daily routine, government business will include Committee of the Whole on Supply and second reading of Bill 200, 198, and Bill 212.
The motion is that the House rise to meet again on Monday, March 2nd, between the hours of 3 p.m. and 11:59 p.m. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Contrary-minded, nay? The motion is carried. We stand adjourned.